Hi girls. As promised, I said I'd do a quick pre-exam revision bit on the causes of the French Revolution, which we've been looking at. So I'm stumbling away. I've divided it into about 8 sections that we can look at before, really before like the storming of the Bastille. You know, the prison with the 6 or 7 prisoners and the gunpowder. So we'll start with the Ancien Regime, the ancient regime, the old system that Louis was the King of France. His family had been the royal family for many years. All the power lay with him, and he believed that it was a God-given right for him to be the monarch, the divine right of the king. Nobody could threaten him. God put him in his place. God gave him his power. God would take away his power. It really was, in his eyes, it was that simple, right? That simple. And the system that he oversaw and was controlling of was pretty much what we talked about, this estate system, where the first estate was anybody who worked for the church, the clergy from the very top to the very bottom, the little priests. Second on the system were the nobles, and those two groups of people never paid tax. That was highly unfair in our eyes, because everybody pays tax. But think about it from the French point of view, and we like the French, don't we? Their point of view is dead simple. They'd never seen their first or second estate pay tax, so it's nothing new. So whilst we think it's ridiculously unfair, I guess the expectation of the nobles to not pay tax was just what they'd always had. So think about it, I guess, twist it, flip it, and think about it from that point of view, that this is a big deal. And of course the third estate was so massive, ranging from the intellectuals, the philosophers, the bourgeoisie, those the people like the entrepreneurs, the business owners, a lot of very wealthy French people in that group, right down to your Pierre the peasant. And we've talked about Pierre the peasant before. He's at the very bottom of that third estate. So it's massive. It's 80% of the country in terms of their numbers. But relative to everything else, they've not got that much actual power or money, right? Potential, but not actual power. Third up, taxes and wars, and Louis basically has, remember Jack Necker, his little finance minister, the finance minister with a little name. Louis knows he's got a problem, right? He knows his wife was a spender. He knows he's got Versailles. He knows that the system of his fancy court, his nobles, his palaces, all of that cost money, and that was what kings did. Kings just spent money, and they got their money from their peasants, their third estate. That was, again, it was nothing particularly new or particularly different. It's just how it was. So that's something I think you can kind of put in your knowledge bank and add to that. I mentioned it a second ago. I mentioned Versailles, the palace. Now, it's only 30 kilometres away from Paris, but it's a world away. I've said before, in those times back in the day, that 30 kilometres, peasants didn't go 30 kilometres in a lifetime. Right now, that is from Brisbane to Ipswich. It's a nothing distance, but back in the day, it was a distance that was considerable. It was a distance that the peasant couldn't conceivably make, and then when the rich went to Paris, they saw why they'd moved to Versailles. To be honest, that Paris was a dump. It was filthy. It was heaving with peasants. It was overcrowded. It started to be, remember when we talked about the Bastille, there starts to be a mob, a group of people that like to riot, that like to cause trouble. So this mob in Paris is a bit of an issue, and that doesn't go away for the whole of the French Revolution. It's a bit of a, I guess, an unpredictable and violent group of people. Versailles, anything but. Golden gates, beautiful gardens, fountains, windows, ballrooms, studies, boudoirs. That's the French name, I think, for a bedroom. Salons. That's the French name for a living room. All of the fancy stuff that you would expect any king to have. Louis XVI had it in spades. Marie Antoinette, his wife, remember she's from Austria, makes sense, good wife. France, Austria, two big countries getting it together, may as well make it like a union between the two power people, the king and the princess. It makes sense, but equally, him choosing to go with an Austrian girl was possibly not the wisest move in the book. It doesn't make him look very patriotic. It doesn't make him look like a French flag waver at a time when, France should have been. Remember, they've been in the war in America to try to get the British out, and they're successful. So in many respects, although as a spender, some of his spending looks as though it's quite a good idea, but keep in mind the debt that's being created is massive, and all of the other things like Versailles, like the fancy clergy and the fancy nobles, they don't really get to grips with things. Coming up 7 minutes, I thought it'd be faster. Next up, I'm going to talk about very quickly about philosophers. Remember, education. The learning had become a real big thing, especially for the third estate, the bourgeoisie, who've got a bit of cash. They're getting to uni, they're doing some courses, they're upskilling, and they're asking questions. They're saying, what's this about the king having divine right? We need to have separation of powers, we need accountability, we need to make sure that the parliament, which hasn't met, remember, 150 years, no parliament. What sort of country has that? No normal country has that. Ridiculous. So the bourgeoisie is getting a little bit, they're getting a little bit jumpy. They're reading this philosophy, Voltaire, Diderot, Montesquieu, all those French guys who are sitting around literally on French pavements in French coffee shops, drinking and smoking and hanging out and doing what philosophers do, questioning authority. All of that is a real big threat, because these newly educated bourgeoisie use this as their, I guess, as their kind of leverage to make progress into the system. And think about it, some of the church and some of the nobility actually have started to sympathise with the third estate. Remember the Abbot of Sieyès, and he's the dude in the picture that you're going to see in the test. He sat there thinking, oh my God, what have I done? It's like he's taken the cork out of the champagne bottle, and it's not going back in. And I think it's a really important thing to keep in mind and remember, that it's not just the third estate. They've got mates in the other estates. So by the time they all wander through the gates of Versailles for this parliament, remember the Estates General Parliament, when all those three groups, the first, the second, the third, go there, and Louis thinks, they're just going to give me some money. I'll ask nicely, but they'll give me it. And he's got another thing coming, right? They don't just give him the money. They say, hang on, you show some goodwill, you give us something, you make a concession on your side before we give you some money. And that's what goes on at the Estates General in May, June of 1789. And then the third estate just say, we're over it, see ya, we're going. And they head down and call themselves the National Assembly. They head down, remember, into that tennis court where the big French pitch, where they play with the funny tennis rackets, and the Royal Tennis Court, the Real Tennis Court, as they say in Spanish, and they're busy in there basically saying, we vote to not go away. We vote to be a massive thorn in the side of the king, and we'll not take no for an answer. And from there, that National Assembly, that tennis court oath, marks the start really of the French Revolution. That comes with it the Declaration of the Rights of Man, and these are the things that, man everywhere is equal. And remember, equality, brotherhood, freedom, they're the watchwords of the revolution. Liberté, égalité, fraternité in French. That's what it stands for. And eventually then, when the king moves his gunpowder to the remember the prison castle in Paris, the Bastille, and the French people think, oh my God, he's going to move the army against the Parisians. Remember I said about the mob before? The mob are these violent hooligans, these kind of hoons, these bogans that live in Paris, and they're hungry and they don't know what to do, and now they think their king, who they don't much like anyway, and he's married an Austrian, and he's got it in for the Third Estate. They think he's got a whole bunch of political prisoners in the Bastille, he's got all his gunpowder, he's sending his army from Versailles. All that gossip, all those stories become a situation whereby suddenly, July 14, bosh, boom, in they go, and the Versailles and the Bastille prison gets burned down, and the revolution is game on, and suddenly the king has to listen. And whether he listens properly or whether he fake listens is kind of, that's a story for another day. We know the story doesn't end great because he had his head chopped off, so nobody believes him anyway. But the idea that by this point we've covered the causes and the initial action at the Bastille prison on that July the 14th, the French Revolution now is on. 12 minutes, man, that was a little bit longer. Hopefully it uploads quickly. Alright, thanks girls.